Hello, my name is Erica, and I'm the Dyslexic Trekkie. When I chose Deathwish, I paired it with the next in the series, Life Signs. I forgot how Janeway heavy it was and decided to do it on its own. Deathwish was the first in a small series of Q stories on Voyager. This Q, not that Q. You know what? For the sake of confusion, they're going to be Quinn and Q, because I don't feel like making myself dizzy here. Quinn is found in a comet and freed by Voyager. Captain Janeway finds herself in the middle of a trial to decide if Quinn should have the right to end his own life. Something the Q finds so abhorrent, they locked him in a comet to keep him from doing so. Because of human ethics, the trial isn't to allow Quinn to commit suicide, but to make him mortal. Captain Janeway decided that Quinn should be allowed to have control over his life and should be made mortal, then pled for him to consider the value in a brief life. The request is for him to live out the one life he now has, and to see the richness it has. Sadly, the idea of a newly mortal Q is something our Q can't allow. In a final show of respect to Quinn, Q gives him a poison the doctor can't counter, allowing him the peace he wishes. The episode begins with the science. There's a comet visible with an erratic course, something strange enough for Voyager to follow it. For reasons of science, they're all convinced this can't be what they see. It's one of those times we get to remember that Captain Janeway is a science officer under that red uniform. I'll always love those moments when she gets to nerd out. When B'Elanna tries to transport a sample, we see a man standing on the ship. Oddly well, considering he was in space with no form of protection. Never a good sign. Also, never a good sign when he can walk through the force field. Janeway doesn't know it yet, but she's about to have a very strange week. Once Captain Janeway hears there's a Q on the ship, she puts the ship into red alert. Clearly, she paid attention in her briefings. I kind of feel bad for Quinn in the beginning. We know he's not the Q of TNG, but Captain Janeway doesn't. She just knows he's a being who's caused immeasurable amounts of trouble. But that's not him. Quinn is open, greets her warmly with gratitude, and even tries to make her lunch. She's having none of it, and even pulls her hand away. Talk about being judged before you're known. He never had a chance. As he tries to be sociable, and Captain Janeway tries to assert her authority, Quinn lets us know what he wants: to die. And then he tries to die. It goes badly. He's alive. The rest of the men aren't. It's hard to not go on a blow-by-blow about the episode. It's just too fun to watch the Q do their thing. I can't, though. Captain Janeway is faced with 50% of her crew gone, and now the two Q on the bridge. I want to talk about the Q someday. I have my theories on what's going on with them, but this video isn't about the Q. When talking about the plot, I entirely forgot the point of the trial was to grant Quinn asylum. Then Quinn flees, taking Voyager with him. After careful research, I did work out which Christmas tree Voyager was found on. Sadly, I can't say where. YouTuber Trekkie confidentiality requires anonymity. But after the goofiest chase scene in history, Captain Janeway agrees to a hearing for the asylum. As Tuvok agrees to represent Quinn, we get a sense of why he wants to do this. I bring this up because we need to see the real scope of what Captain Janeway is doing here. Quinn isn't the arrogant jerk Q is. There's something kind in him. Not that a jerk doesn't deserve to live, but there's a true dilemma here. This contrasts well with Q's incessantly needling Janeway with a show of sexism I'm not wholly convinced he feels. It's just his joke to occupy him and tease her. Captain Janeway shows she expects proper decorum. There's just so many things I want to say relating to the argument of Q and Quinn in the beginning of the hearing. Yes, Quinn wants to end his life. Yes, this has implications that hit close to the areas of my job, but so does Q's argument that his reasoning makes him mentally unbalanced. It isn't the notion of his wanting to end his life, but his desire to force the Q continuum to face change that makes him unbalanced in their eyes. In real psychology, being different or having a different view doesn't make you mentally ill. This isn't the same as people saying that there are nanites in vaccines that make us emit 5G. This is equivalent to a woman in the 20s wanting to live with their lover without marrying. The thing I see is if Quinn's desire wasn't to die, but make some other drastic change the continuum would have to face, the response would be the same. Something Captain Janeway doesn't think to ask. And then Q tries to play the spirit of Christmas past with 3 guests. Poor Janeway has to explain how they, including Sir Isaac Newton, are on Voyager. I love her attempt at an honest explanation that ends with her saying, "You're all dreaming." After the arguments and plotting by Tuvok, Captain Janeway meets with Q. This is where we see one of the cruelest things I think Q has ever done. Captain Janeway dresses him down for his past, including introducing the Borg. Then he shows her Earth, a chance to just be home. It shows how thoughtlessly cruel he is. I always found the visit to the Continuum to be interesting. We're walking through a metaphor, something I didn't get as a kid. I knew they weren't on Earth, but what they meant was more than I understood. I'd be interested in walking through what everything means sometime. I have new ideas. Captain Janeway listens to Quinn's argument, and again, the wish for death isn't a desire to commit suicide in the sense we consider. It's more of someone reaching the end of their life and making peace with it. But what does one do when there is no end? Then we find Q in Janeway's bed, an issue that feels like it's meant for another episode. Only thing is, it's clear he's screwing with her here. Beyond his silly teasing, he has a point. What would happen if Q had been given a guardian to ensure his safety? It's a reality we'd never see. Even if it happened, that would go on off-screen. But a humane way of keeping him alive poses a more complicated issue. Captain Janeway makes her argument, granting asylum, and pleads with Quinn to choose life. She has a real point. This is a life he's never experienced. Actual mortality does change things. The finite influence we have adds something. There's something deeply touching to Janeway and Chakotay trying to find something interesting for Quinn to do. But that's not how this ends. Quinn dies. Captain Janeway says goodbye. This is a deeply difficult episode to review. As a mental health professional, I work to try and keep people from committing self-harm. Hearing arguments for suicide in any context is difficult to judge. But at its core, this was never about suicide. It was about self-determination. The question Captain Janeway had to answer, even without her Boolean definition of acceptable suicide, is if a person has the right to determine their own path. I'm sorry there wasn't a way to incorporate Quinn into the story. From a writing standpoint, it wouldn't have worked, but in-universe, it wouldn't have either. There was no good outcome. Either an immortal being would be tended to for all eternity like a toddler, or he died on her ship, sparking alterations to an entire species she barely grasps. She had a no-win situation before, but none with these stakes. However, there's another level to the story. Captain Janeway is shown Earth. She's offered a way home. All she has to do is compromise her ethics to the point where she doesn't recognize them anymore, and her people would be home. She would have never said yes. And not just because it would have ended the show. The moment Q offered her a shortcut home, his case was lost. The question is, did he mean that as an outcome? This isn't just a case of her ethics holding strong. It's a case of her being manipulated. I believe Q and Quinn were playing a long game. Captain Janeway is about to find herself in the middle of it. Thank you for watching. If you like this subject, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any thoughts, feelings, or ideas on this subject, please share in the comments below. Again, my name is Erica, and I'm the Dyslexic Trekkie. You're not getting down. Knock it off. As Tugok, I thought making him Quinn would make it a little easier. It's marginally easier. Alexa, how do you spell incessant?
Incessant is spelled I-N-C-E-S-S-A-N-T.
You're still going to have to be up here, Ray. Get up here. Yeah, you have to be up here. Come on. Alexa does not mean you get to jump down.
From divsense.com. When used as verbs, self rapidly upward.
What? Alexa, stop. Thank you.